Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another daily dose of Commander Legends Battle for Baldur's Gate Commander spoilers. So it is the final day of spoiler season. We got 2 more precons to go, and our first deck today is a pretty neat one. It is a Gruul cast from Exile deck, kind of like Gruul Prosper. There's a lot of really sweet, interesting cards that has Exile shenanigans, lets you cast stuff from Exile. So we should probably jump right into the deck, start talking about the new cards. Before we do, a couple of quick reminders. Number 1, if you want to keep up on all the latest spoilers throughout the day, you can find them all over on MTGpreviews.com. Number 2, if you need some of these cards, or any cards really, you can get them from our amazing sponsor Card Kingdom over at cardkingdom.com/MTGGoldfish. Anyway, let's talk Commander Legends, Battle for Baldur's Gate, Commander Precon spoilers. Alright, so this is the Gruul deck, led by Feldorn Dreadwolf Herald, and this deck is built around a relatively new theme to Commander, which is casting stuff from Exile. There have always been mechanics, Cascade, Madness, whatever, that let you cast things from Exile in one way or another, but it wasn't until recently that we started getting legends that cared about this. The big example is probably Prosper, Tomebound, an incredibly popular commander. Feldorn is kind of Gruul Prosper in a weird way. When you cast a spell from Exile, or a land enters a battlefield under your control from Exile, you get a 2/2 green wolf token, and then you can pay 1, discard a card, exile the top card of your library, you can play that card this turn. So just like Prosper gives you treasure tokens when you play cards from Exile, Feldorn is going to give you wolf tokens when you play cards from Exile. And if you want to build around this card, a lot of the same cards that are good in Prosper are going to be good here. Look at the red cards in a Prosper list. Velika Exploration, Outpost Siege, Stolen Strategy, Galvanic Relay, Jeska's Will, all this impulse style draw. The Exiles cards let you play it. Those are going to be the staples of a Feldorn deck. The question is, what does green add to this archetype? And the answer is not really a lot, at least yet. So there are some sweet green play from Exile cards in this precon, but really green isn't a primary color for casting things from Exile. You do get a few things like Beanstalk Giant, adventure spells. Technically, when you cast the creature side after putting them on an adventure, you're going to be casting it from Exile, or Madness technically cast from Exile, or Crashing Footfalls, other suspense spells are cast from Exile. Probably the biggest reward is really stuff like Escape from the Wilds, Bloodbraid Elf, Violent Outburst, Cascade spells, a little bit of impulse draw, but there's really not a ton that pushes you into green. So I think that what you're really going to get from green is staples. Like, green is the most powerful color in Commander. We just did a Commander Clash podcast talking about this. So being in green, sure, you might not get all the black cast from Exile stuff, but what you do get is absurd ramp, absurd card draw, really, really powerful creatures. So it's a great support color in this deck. So I think most of your exiling effects are going to be red, and then green is going to give you all the support cards to really execute your game plan, to speed up your game plan. The other way to go with this is kind of like a wolf tribal deck, and green's going to help you there as well. If you want to go like Feldorn Wolves, you get Master of the Wild Hunt, you get all the werewolf stuff, you get actual wolf lords like Nightpack Ambusher to make your wolf tokens even better. So it is a really sweet commander. So Feldorn, I really like it, and it kind of exemplifies what this deck is about. Pretty much every new card in the deck is all about casting stuff from Exile. As far as our backup commander pairing, we got another choose a background/background commander. So we have Doran of the Yawning Portal, a 4-mana 3/3 legendary human warrior. It's a green card, and it says when it attacks, look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may exile a creature card from among them, put the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. For as long as that card remains exiled, you may cast it. And this spell has Undaunted, so it costs 1 less to cast for each opponent you control. And then, of course, you can choose a background. The background that comes in the deck is Passionate Archaeologist, a 2-mana red background, and it says commander creatures you own have. Whenever you cast a spell from Exile, this creature deals damage equal to that spell's mana value to target opponent. So let's start with the easy one, Passionate Archaeologist. I couldn't really find another partner that you'd want to pair it with. It does work well with Durin, of course, so if you want to go choose a background that direction, that is a obvious partner pairing. But this is a card I think you can just play in the 99 of basically any cast from Exile deck. If you're playing Prosper, or Feldorn now, or Layla, this is going to be a great option in your deck, turning your commander into an absurd source of damage. Just know that it's not technically commander damage. Even though your commander is dealing the damage, commander damage is only combat damage. So this this isn't going to count as commander damage, but still, if you're all about casting spells from Exile, this is going to give you a ton of damage. And I gotta say, the main set backgrounds from Commander Legends 2 were pretty mad for me, and I thought they were pretty bad. In almost all of them, I was like, there's no way I'd ever play this in the 99, but all the ones we've seen from these precons so far are really, really good, and it's kind of changing my opinion of the mechanic. As far as Duran, there's a few backgrounds that work really well with it. When you think about what Duran wants, it wants to attack each turn, preferably without dying, and then you're going to benefit by exiling creatures, ramping into them. So you're mostly going to be looking for backgrounds that somehow let you attack with Duran. Like Criminal Past gives menace, Cultist of the Absolute gives it flying, Flaming Fist raised by giant, they can make it really big or double striking, even Haunted One just giving it undying, so if Duran dies, well, at least it's coming back. Those are all really good options. So look for kind of Voltron-y creature protection style backgrounds. That's where Duran's going to be at its best. And then there's a couple ways you can build around this. I think one easy way is go with colorless cards, because the most powerful thing that Duran does is not only does it draw you a card, it's going to ramp you. That Undaunted ability means if you got the full table of 4 commander players, the creature exiles is going to get a 3 mana discount. That's actually really big. So your Solemn Simulacrum is going to be 1 mana, your Kozilek and Ulamogs and Wormcoil Engine is going to get really, really cheap. So I could see this being a sweet, big colorless stuff commander, but you don't really have to be colorless. It's just important to keep in mind that Undaunted is reducing the generic mana cost. So let's say you got an Acidic Slime, you hit it with your Duran, you're going to cast Acidic Slime for 2 green mana. That's awesome. That's a great source of ramp. On the other hand, if you hit a Gigantosaurus or something, Duran doesn't really ramp you at all because it's all colored mana. So those are some of the things to keep in mind as you're building around this card. But I think Duran, it's a pretty interesting commander. It's kind of just generic value-y ramp style commander, but if you like playing a bunch of creatures and casting them on the cheap, Duran with whatever background that you want is going to give you a lot of options because you can go into any 2-color combination with this card. We also got a new red instant, Delayed Blast Fireball. So 3 mana instant, 2 damage to each opponent and each creature they control, but if it's cast from Exile, it's 5 damage to each opponent and each creature they control, and you can foretell it for 6 mana. So Delayed Blast Fireball, it's kind of like a Pyroclasm at instant speed that upgrades into a burn down the house at instant speed, but it's also a little bit like Mizium Mortars if you overload it, or even a Plague Wind, and then it only hits your opponent's stuff. So the big question is 2 damage / 5 damage enough? So I gotta say Pyroclasm, 2 damage to each creature, isn't really a playable card in most commander decks. However, you get the upside of maybe being able to deal 5 damage with this, which does really change it. There's going to be times in your commander game where you're up against someone with a bunch of random tokens, and 2 damage for 3 mana instant speed is going to be great. So is 6 mana with the foretell ability to get 5 damage to everything going to be good? I'm still not really sure. The problem I have with 5 damage to everything is it's not going to be enough to kill all the big creatures in Commander. Like, there's just a lot of big things that are going to dodge 5 damage, so this might be a card that's kind of restricted to a couple of homes. Like, I'm not sure I would play this just as a generic Wrath, on the idea that I'm going to foretell this, and then I'm going to cast it for 6 mana, I'm going to deal 5 damage to all your stuff. I don't know if that's good enough. However, there are specific archetypes where this is going to be great, in part because it hits your opponent for damage as well. So you got stuff like Toralf, or Neheb, or Firesong and Sunspeaker that really care about just mass damage to things. Like, because delaying Blast Fireball hits your opponents, Neheb's going to make a ton of mana if you cast this, and it doesn't even mess with your creatures or your Neheb or Toralf redirecting the damage, the excess damage. Firesong, Sunspeaker are going to gain you a ton of life. So I think damage shenanigan decks probably going to want this. The other place this will be good, which is true of basically every card in this precon, is in cast from Exile decks, and that doesn't just include literal Prosper style decks or the commanders we're talking about from these decks itself, but this is going to be sweet in like Maelstrom Wanderer. In Maelstrom Wanderer, you cascade into this. You cast it for free. You get 5 damage to everything. That seems pretty sweet. Or like a Tally spinning into this is also really good. So I think those are the homes for this card. Probably not good enough to be a blasphemous act in any red deck, but if you have synergies for casting stuff from Exile, can cheat this into play with weird things, or you got those damage shenanigans, then I think Delayed Blast Fireball actually pretty good. We also got Nell Feshny, a 6 mana 4/6 flying beast demon. This says when you cast a spell from Exile, copy it. You may choose new targets for that copy. If it's a permanent spell, it gains haste, and at the beginning of your end step, sacrifice this permanent. So this card is pretty spicy. It's essentially like super duper mega Panharmonicon, but only from stuff that you cast from Exile. So this makes it sort of like a lithoform engine, where you're able to copy anything. Although if it's a permanent, it's only going to be temporary, or a Jin-Gitaxias. This is kind of a new thing in Magic, the ability to copy permanent spells. So if you're playing a deck that is going to be casting a lot of stuff from Exile, I think this is a pretty reasonable top-end option, especially in decks that can cast a lot of things from Exile. Remember, this doesn't have a restriction on it. It doesn't say the first spell you cast from Exile each turn or anything like that. It's just any spell you cast from Exile, which seems especially absurd with certain Cascade commanders, like Yidris, Abaddon, another new edition. These are commanders that once you hit with them or pull off their thing, everything you cast from your hand is going to have Cascade. So that means everything is going to be casting something from Exile, which means every spell you cast is not only going to Cascade into something new, but you're going to get 2 copies of that Cascade thing, which is an absurd amount of damage. So that's where I'm most excited for this card, is like Yidris style decks, but it's also fine in Evelyn or Belborca or Prosper or with our new precon commanders. So I think this is another card that just seems really good in cast from Exile decks. Outside of that, not going to be good enough. There's better options. If you can maybe incidentally cast something from Exile with Jessica's Will or whatever, meh, I don't think this is going to be worth playing in your deck. But if your commander really supports casting stuff from Exile, this seems like a great 6-drop. We also got Green Slime, and this card's pretty crazy. 3 mana 2/2 ooze with flash. It says when it enters the battlefield, counter target activated or triggered ability from an artifact or an enchantment source. If a permanent's ability was countered this way, destroy the permanent and you can foretell it for 1 mana. So Green Slime, it's essentially a green stifle mixed with naturalize. You only get artifacts and enchantments, but this card blows up a lot of stuff in Commander. When I first read this card, I was like, okay, does this actually hit enough? How many artifacts or enchantments actually have activated or triggered abilities? And the answer is a lot of them. I went on EDH Rect and looked through the 100 most played artifacts, and essentially all of them are going to have some sort of activated or triggered ability. All of your equipment have activated abilities. Vehicles, Sensei's Divining Top, Archaeomancer's Map, Aetherflux Reservoir, Icy Crown Scepter, even all your mana rocks in like Ashnod's Altar. The only problem with mana abilities, and I put Ashnod's Altar on here so we could talk about this, is that they're not going to put a trigger on the stack. So you're not actually going to be able to blow up Soul Rings, Ashnod's Altars, anything that is a mana ability. Not because it doesn't have an activated ability, because a mana ability is an activated ability, but there's no trigger on the stack for you to actually counter. So with the exception of things that make mana rocks, Ashnod's Altars, etc., this pulls up quite literally every important artifact in the format. I think discounting the mana rocks again, out of the top 100 artifacts that it's see play according to EDH Rec, this only misses on Fists of Suns in Bootlegger's stash. So really, this is blow up an artifact that's not a mana rock and instant speed, but you do have the timing restriction. You gotta flash this in with the trigger on the stack. As far as enchantments, it's a lot of the important ones. It does miss much more when it comes to an enchantment, because there's some enchantments that just don't have any abilities. But that said, the 2 most popular enchantments in the format, Rhystic Study, Smothering Tithe, those have activated and triggered abilities. You got Sylvan Library, you got Garruk's Uprising, you got Phyrexian Arena. These are all having abilities that are going to put triggers on this deck that you can counter and blow up with your Green Slime, which seems really good. As far as what you miss, it's like Propaganda doesn't have a triggered ability, or rampy enchantments like Wild Growth or Underworld Breach, Doubling Season. So there are some whiffs here, but really this card hits almost everything. And I think the comparison is Reclamation Sage. Is this card better than Reclamation Sage? It's really close. So the upside of Reclamation Sage is it gets those mana rocks. It gets anything, any artifact or enchantment this is going to get. Green Slime, its upside is you can flash it in, which is nice. It gets an extra toughness, which is nice. And you can foretell it and play it for 1 mana. So you don't really got to leave up a ton of mana to make this card work. I think it's really, really close. Obviously, if you're an Ooze deck or have Cast from Exile synergies, this is going to be a better Rec Sage for you. In a generic deck, I think they're roughly on the same level, and I'm playing planning to try Green Slime and see, because I think it might actually be better than Rexage. Also, little shout out to this card for Legacy and Vintage. We haven't talked too much about those formats, but remember, all the cards from Commander precons are legal there, and I actually think there's a chance that Green Slime could show up in those decks, in part because there are quite a few things that it hits, but more importantly, because this does a couple of really important things. One is it blows up Urza Saga, which is really nice. It's an enchantment with triggered abilities, so this is an easy way your opponent plays their Urza Saga, and with that first trigger on the stack to add the first counter to make a mana, you can potentially flash this in for 1 mana with Foretell and blow up your opponent's land and get rid of the Urza Saga. The other thing this does in Legacy and Vintage, which is really cute, is it's a cool way to get around Chalice of the Void, and we'll see if that's actually relevant enough. We got Force of Vigor and all this stuff now, but this is a 1 mana way where when there's a Chalice trigger on the stack, you can flash this in, even if it's a Chalice on 1, and blow it up. So yes, that does kind of require something getting countered to have the triggered ability on the stack, but still, I think that could put it in the conversation. So Green Slime, I like this card a lot. Maybe a better Rexage, maybe a worse Rexage, but somewhere on that power, and that's saying something because Rexage is one of the most played green creatures in all of Commander. We also got a new D20 rolling enchantment in Journey to the Lost City. So 4-mana enchantment says at the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top 4 cards of your library, roll a D20. If you get a 1 to 9, put a land card from among them onto the battlefield. If you get a 10 to 19, make a 2/2 green wolf token, give it +1/+1 counters for each creature among the exiled cards. Or if you get the critical hit and roll a 20, you get to put all permanents exiled with it onto the battlefield and then sacrifice it. Worth mentioning with that last mode, if you high roll, it's all permanents forever. So if this has been sitting out for a few turns and exiling cards, you could be putting 10, 20, your entire deck on the battlefield if it was all permanents. So Journey to the Lost City, it seems fun. It's kind of like a repeatable Elvish Rejuvenator mixed with a bigger Blossom with the upside of, if you get really lucky, you could just win the game by rolling a 20. The only problem is it is pretty slow. It's 4 mana. You don't get the first trigger until your next upkeep, and then you don't have any control over it. Like, there's going to be times where you really need a blocker to, I don't know, stop some Voltron-y commander for a turn, and you get a land. Or there's going to be times when you really want to land and you end up with a wolf. So I don't know if this is actually a good card in a generic sense. I think if I'm just playing a generic deck, I'm probably going to stick with, I don't know, Explosive Vegetation, Migration Path. There's so many 4-mana double ramp spells that it's kind of hard to want this one. That said, it is nice that the land comes into play untapped, and if you're playing a deck that cares about what Journey to the Lost City cares about, which is playing stuff from Exile like Feldorn, that would be a good home for it, or dice rolling, then I think this is a pretty cool addition to your deck. Like, if you're playing Will or Vondris, a commander that actively cares about rolling dice or can manipulate your rolls, then this becomes much better, because if you can hit that 20, this is a really, really, really strong card for 4 mana. So I think those are the homes for the deck. So in a generic deck, probably not good enough, but in those specific archetypes, I think Journey to the Lost City is actually super fun. We have Venture Forth, 4-mana sorcery, exile cards from the top of your library till you hit a land card, put it onto the battlefield, untapped, again, upside. The rest go on the bottom, and then you exile it with 3 time counters on it, and you can suspend it for 3 turns for 2 mana. So is Venture Forth in the conversation to be a playable card? Maybe. So there's a lot of good green ramp. You got Cultivates, you got Kadama's Regis, Rampant Groves, Nature's Lore. The list is really long. So Venture Forth, what are the upsides of this card? Well, one is the land comes into play untapped. The other is it can hit non-basic lands, so this could find your Field of the Dead or whatever like that. On the other hand, you're not really tutoring for a land. You're just getting the top land of your deck. It could be a basic, it could be something awesome. You don't really know. The problem is, it's a little slow if you don't draw. If you have this and suspend it on turn 2, turn 3 it ticks down, turn 4 it ticks down, turn 5 you're gonna get extra mana. That's kind of okay, I guess. And then it's going to go back to Exile. And then turn 6, it ticks down. Turn 7, it ticks down. Turn 8, you're going to get an extra mana. Okay. And then it goes back to Exile. And then turn 9, turn 10, turn 11. So in its ideal scenario where you suspend this on turn 2, maybe, if you're lucky and the game goes long, maybe this gets you 3 lands. Maybe it gets you 2 lands if the game is a little bit shorter, depending on your playgroup and what the decks are like. That makes me skeptical of this being good enough. When you actually math it out and think through how many lands you're going to get, average is probably 2. If you're lucky, maybe 3, and that's assuming that you actually suspend this on turn 2. If you're playing it later in the game, it's going to be even slower. Off the top of your deck on, turn 6 or something, you cast it for 4 mana, you get a land, turn 9 you would get the next one. That's just not all that exciting. So again, I think this might just be a little bit too slow compared to the other options. It is cool that it seems to be the continuation of a cycle from Commander 2021, where we got red and blue versions of this, making mana, drawing cards, so it is cool to see it return. The problem is, wouldn't you just rather Migration's Path or Explosive Vegetation? Like, on turn 4 you're plus 2 mana. This is on turn 4 you're plus 1 mana, and then on turn 7 you're plus another mana, or whatever. On turn 2 you suspend it, you get the land on turn 5, and go through the math we talked about before. I'm a little skeptical that's going to be good enough unless you have synergies for it. If you're playing a suspend deck, like a Londo, well then this card's pretty sweet, because you can remove time counters from it, you can speed it up. If you're getting a land every 2 turns with this card, then this card becomes very exciting. Then you're talking about getting 4 or 5 lands per game, and they're non-basic lands potentially, and they're coming to play untapped. Then that's a legitimately good card. So venture forth. I don't think you drop your current green ramp for it in most decks, but if you have shenanigans, casting stuff from Exile, whatever, then it's a pretty interesting option if you can speed it up a little bit. We also got Tillin Kelly Hunter, a big green Scorpion Scout, 7 mana 7/7 with trample. It says, once each turn, you may pay 0 rather than the mana cost for a creature spell you cast from Exile, and then it's got an adventure mode. For 2 mana, you can exile a creature from your graveyard and cast it until the end of your next turn. I like how these halves work together. You get something big in your graveyard, spend 2, exile it, next turn, play the Hunter itself, get to cast that thing for free. When you think about it, if you're playing a deck that's about casting stuff from Exile, this card is probably going to be close to a free spell. You spend 7 mana on it, but can immediately follow it up with a second creature without spending any mana on that one. That's a really powerful effect. So this is Wildwood Rebirth, essentially, with a timing restriction. You got to cast the creature the next turn, and it's at sorcery speed, mixed with a once per turn from Exile Rooftop Storm effect, which is a really powerful effect. This could be getting you an Ulamog, a Craterhoof Behemoth, a Draco, name some really big expensive thing. Hunter doesn't care. It's going to cast it from free if it's coming from Exile. So again, I feel like I'm saying this every single card we talk about. If you're a deck that cares about casting stuff from Exile, you're playing all those Exile effects, you're gonna have stuff in Exile all the time, then I think this is a great card. But in a generic deck, I don't think it's good enough. It is nice that it works with itself. So in a generic deck, even if you don't have Exile synergies, you basically get to use it once if you adventure into the Hunter the following turn. But really, for that amount of mana, I don't know, just cast a Craterhoof for Avenger Zendikar. Once you get to 7 mana in green, there's so many busted, insane, powerful cards. This probably just isn't quite good enough. So where this is going to shine is not when you're using it one time with its adventure ability, but when you're in an Exile deck that is potentially going to be giving you a free creature every turn. Then this could be adding 8 mana, 10 mana, some ridiculous amount of mana each turn. Probably still less than an Nyxbloom Ancient, but still, it's a precon card for a specific deck. So in the right deck, this card is great. In the other decks, probably not so much. We also got Sarvok's Tomb, a 4 mana artifact. This says when it enters the battlefield, you take the initiative, so start venturing through Undercity. You can tap it at a colorless, or if you have initiative, 2 mana instead. And then you can pay 3 exile cards from the top of your library until you hit a non-land. You can cast that card without paying its mana cost. Only if you have completed a dungeon may you activate the ability. So this is another twist on Hedron Archive. We actually got one in the main set as well. Stone Speaker Crystal, a card that I actually really like because it's Hedron Archive, a little bit less card draw, but really good graveyard hate. I think that Sarvok's Tomb, probably worse than Crystal, probably worse than Hedron Archive as well, unless you are an initiative deck, because the power of this card is at last mode. The 3 mana cascade into anything, Tibalt Trickery yourself without having to counter a spell, that is a really, really strong effect. Yes, you can control it if you're Vampiric Tutoring, Sensei's Divining, Topping, Scroll Racking, but even just randomly spinning it like a Chaos Wand on yourself, that's really strong. 3 mana, cascade into a spell, cast it for free, that's bonkers. The problem is you have to have completed a dungeon to actually make that work. So if you're not a dungeon deck of some kind, it's going to be worse than Crystal. It's going to be worse than Hedron Archive. In a dungeon deck though, This card seems really exciting, like Sephiroth, really good at completing dungeons. Sararak can speed through dungeons at lightning speed. Varus, some of the new cards from Commander Legends 2, Safana, Rashad, whatever, any of those initiative commanders, that's where this card is going to be really, really good. So think of it that way. How likely am I to complete a dungeon? If the answer is pretty likely, Sarvok's Tomb is actually an all-star. It is so good because of that last mode, and also being just a fine mana rock, and the initiative is fun. On the other hand, if you can't complete a dungeon, just stick with your Hedron archives. As far as reprints in the deck, there's really 4 notable ones. The biggest one by far, Jeska's Will, pushing $20 in a true red staple, so great addition to the deck. Stolen Strategy, I didn't realize is actually like a $12 card, I guess because it's only been printed in Battle Bond as far as real printings, but it's a great addition to the Cast from Exile theme. And then we got Leela and also Xenagos the Reveler, which are both like $6, somewhere in that range. So if you end up picking up the entire precon, yeah, I mean, not a ton of high-end reprints, but some really good ones. Jeska's Will is like a super legit card, so some nice value added to the precon with the reprint slot as well. Anyway, that brings us to the end of our first Commander Legends Battle for Baldur's Gate Commander Precon Daily Spoiler video for today. So what do you think of this deck? Are you picking it up? Do you like the theme? What cards are you hyped about? What other decks are you going to put these cards in? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it. And I'll be back in a bit with one more spoiler video. One more to go for spoiler season for our last precon. So until then, have a good one, and I will talk to you soon.
Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, help us out by clicking that like button down below. And to keep up on all the latest and greatest, click that subscribe button. And don't forget to hit that bell icon to get alerts whenever we have new videos. And if you want to, check out some of our other sweet videos here and here.